The movie Skyfall is a 2012 spy film and the 23rd in the James Bond franchise produced by Eon Productions. The film is third to starring Daniel Craig as the fictional MI6 spy James Bond. The movie begins in Istanbul, where James Bond discovers fellow MI6 agent Ronson seriously injured and the hard disk of a nearby laptop gone. Bond chased the enemy, with the help of Eve from MI6, a professional hitman, Patrice. Bond chase him by motorbike across the tiled roofs of the bazaar and eventually end up on a train. The two then begin shooting on top of the moving train. Bond climbed to excavator to operate, but Patrice shoots Bond in the shoulder. M gives the order for Eve to take the shot. On top of the rolling train, the two then start to battle hand-to-hand. The ongoing struggle between Bond and Patrice prevents Eve from getting a clear shot. Bond is hit and falls into the river below, appearing to be dead. A few months later, M starts writing Bond's obituary. The following day, the chairman of the Intelligence and Security Committee, Gareth Mallory, calls her to a meeting. Mallory explains that the name's hard disk contains the name of every NATO undercover operative stationed in terrorist organizations around the world. Mallory believes that M should retire or, better yet, be made to retire with full honors as a result of her poor handling of the matter. She declines and goes back to work. M's aide Bill Tanner learns that someone is remotely hacking the MI6 database from M's computer. They rush back to MI6 headquarters but are stopped by police who have set up a roadblock in front of the building. A massive explosion then blasts through a portion of the building. Meanwhile, Bond sees a CNN news report on the MI6 strike. He decides to cut his vacation short. Bond returns to London. He confronts M at her house, where she informs him that he has been proclaimed dead. When he requests to rejoin the service, M approves but informs him that he must retake the tests to become a field agent. Bond is transported to MI6, a new underground base, for evaluation. Bond is in bad shape and is having trouble remaster how to shoot. He painfully removes some of the shrapnel left in his shoulder and sends it off for study. Bond meets Eve along the way. M has been suspended from field duty and replaced by Eve. M informs Bond that he has passed his reassessment and may rejoin normal service. Bond encounters Mallory for the first time. Mallory tells him not to cock it up in relation to his new mission. Based on examination, the shrapnel from Bond's shoulder was found to be made of a particular sort of depleted uranium. Bond recognized Patrice quickly after seeing images of 3 persons who use similar ammunition. Patrice is a professional hitman as well as a ghost, with no other known names or aliases. They've received word from the CIA that Patrice will be in Shanghai in 2 days, possibly on another assignment. M directs Bond to go to Shanghai and find Patrice. Tanner asks about Bond's return to the field after Bond has left. M informed Tanner that Bond failed the reassessment. She sends Bond to a gallery to meet the new quartermaster, Q. Q is a young man who provides Bond a radio locator and a brand new Walther PPK equipped with a handprint sensor. Bond travels to Shanghai and follows Patrice from the time he arrives at the airport. Patrice rides in a taxi to a downtown tower. Patrice fires a silenced pistol at the on-duty security guard while Bond watches from his car. Patrice enters a server room on his floor, and Bond closely followed him. He moves over to a window, puts a sniper's rifle together, and cuts a circle hole in the glass. Patrice positioned his rifle towards an old Chinese businessman having a meeting with an unknown woman in a structure across the street. Pull a cover sheet to show a priceless painting work by Amedeo Modigliani. Patrice fires his rifle, shooting the man. At that moment, Bond attacks Patrice and engages in a struggle for the rifle. Bond grabs his right arm and wants to know who his boss is. Bond loses his grip after Patrice fails to answer, causing Patrice to fall and die. The unknown woman across the street watches Bond until he vanishes into the night. Bond discovers a Macau casino chips amongst Patrice's equipment. Back in London, M Computer received a message in the form, "Click here to claim your prize." When she clicks here, a YouTube video comes up. Bond is unexpectedly visited by Eve in his hotel room, where she informs about London news. Eve shaves Bond's neck and face while they make out. Bond then goes to the casino, hands over the chip, and the cashier gives him a briefcase containing $4 million as payment for the assassination. Who believes Bond is the hitman, but is mistaken. Bond recognizes the woman he saw in Shanghai when he receives the money, reveals her name, Severine, and requests a drink from Bond. Bond observes Severine keeps looking at her 3 bodyguards while they converse. She becomes progressively more uneasy and gets up to leave when Bond says he wants to meet her employer. Severine warns Bond that he is about to be assassinated. If he survives, tells him to meet her at yacht and kill her employer. Bond is attacked as he exits the casino by Severine's men. He uses the briefcase to beat 2 of them. The 3rd henchman grabs Bond's signature handgun and tries to shoot him. The Komodo dragons then seize the henchman and pull him away into the darkness to be eaten. Bond hands Eve the case containing the cash and instructs her to put it all on red. Bond manages to board Severine's yacht and follows her while she takes a shower. Back in London, some of the undercover operatives were executed, broadcasted on the internet. Mallory informs M that the Prime Minister has ordered her to testify before an inquiry. M is hesitant, but Mallory insists that MI6 be held accountable to the people they protect. The next morning, Bond and Severine's yacht approaches an island full of buildings. Before meeting with his host, Bond turns on Q's little radio device. Severine advises they turn around, but the rest of the crew on the boat surrounds them. Bond and Severine are kidnapped and have their hands bound. Severine discloses that her employer manipulated everyone. Bond and Severine are separated and taken in opposite directions by the henchmen. Bond is led into a room full of computer servers and tied to a chair. Raul Silva walks out as the doors open. Silva discloses that he is a former MI6 agent, and M betrayed him by leaving to be imprisoned and tortured by the enemy. Silva also says that M has sent him on a mission despite the fact that he has failed all of his tests. Bond and Silva then proceed to a courtyard where Severine is standing and beaten. Silva put a small shot glass of whiskey on Severine's head, and then challenges Bond to shoot the glass off her head. Bond's shooting hand is shaky and misses, but Silva shoots her in the forehead right away. Bond suddenly overpowers and kills Silva's men while leaving Silva alive. Bond then pulls out the radio transmitter that Q handed him, demonstrating that he is not alone. On Q, MI6 helicopters descend over the island. Silva is now in an isolation cell, back at MI6 at basement headquarters. M confronts Silva about his attacks, but he questions her about why she left him. Silva corrects M, who responds by threatening to have his name removed from the MI6 memorial wall. M leaves to accompany the MP to a public hearing. M reveals to Bond that Silva is actually Thiago Rodriguez and he was one of MI6's top agents. M turned over him to Chinese government in return for several agents they held as prisoners and the peaceful handover of Hong Kong in 1997. She gives Bond and Q the assignment to search Silva's laptop for any evidence. In his cell, Silva stands up and zipping up, a guard asks him if he is going somewhere. Meanwhile, Tanner and M are in a tribunal presided over by MP Claire Dower. The inquiry board closely examines and criticizes M for her failure to properly handle the security breaches and the deaths of her agents. Meanwhile, Q discovers that Silva's files conceal their true purpose by using obfuscated coding. Q discovers Silva is using a polymorphic engine to keep his computer coded. Bond notices that some of the letters in the coding form 2 words, Granborough Road. To Q's confusions, the floor's glass trapdoors suddenly flip open. Bond notices Silva has hacked them again. Then, on the display, the words, System Security Breach, appear, followed by a skull and the message, Not such a clever boy. Q instantly disconnects the computer in an attempt to halt the viral upload. Bond dashes through MI6 headquarters to Silva's cell, but it's too late. Bond notices Silva fleeing into the tunnels. Silva can be seen heading down another stairs further down the tunnel. Bond draws his revolver and exits through a service door, finding himself in a London underground tunnel. As Bond proceeds down the track, Q informs him through his headpiece that Silva has evidently spent years planning his move. He arrives to the next service door, only to find it jammed. He becomes terrified when he hears a train approaching. Bond struggles to open the door and eventually resorts to shooting the lock. Meanwhile, Silva is making his way down a stairwell at Temple Tube Station. Bond enters the tube station by another maintenance door, blending in with the large crowd. A train pulls at the station. Bond requests to Q check the camera. Q is unsure because of the large size of crowd. The doors close and the train departs from the station, just as Q finally notices Silva on board. Bond runs after the departing train, latching onto the final car just in time. A witness notices Bond is keen to get home. Bond searches each car on the train for Silva. Silva is making his way to the front of the train. Bond notices that the next stop is Westminster. Bond realizes Silva is on his way to M. Meanwhile, M's inquiry hearing is proceeding as expected. There is a brief disruption when he receives message from Q that Silva has escaped. He tries to warn M, but M refuses to go and appears to be a coward. When the train arrives in Westminster, Silva exits the first car and Bond exits the second. Bond chases him down the crowded tube station. He briefly loses sight of Silva after sliding down an escalator banister. Silva is then followed by Bond into another passageway via an unmarked door. At the hearing, Mallory interrupts MP Dower during the hearing. Bond follows Silva through a poorly lighted path into a cavernous room. Bond notices Silva's shadow on the other side of the room. Silva is climbing a ladder to escape. He turns on a radio. Then he presses a button. The train crashes into the freshly detonated hole. Bond dives for cover while Silva escapes. A police car driven, Silva gets in, and the car takes off. Meanwhile, Silva and his two men arrive at the trial. Silva's men draw their weapons and shoot the security guards stationed at the checkpoint. Bond emerges from Westminster Tube Station and rushes off running as fast as he can toward the tribunal building. M finishes her statement by adding that her late husband was a great poetry lover. Just as M finishes his last word, the doors at the back of the courtroom fly open. Observers begin to stand and scramble, and Mallory leaps over the table. Members of the board and passers-by take cover. Giving Silva a clear shot at M, he aims his weapon on her. But Mallory pushes M down when Silva fires, hitting Mallory in the left shoulder with the bullet. Bond enters the building and kicks open a side door to the courtroom. Bond raises his pistol and shoots Silva. Bond notices the officer's weapon, passes it to Eve. Mallory taking officer's pistol, fire and a brief exchange. Mallory seeks cover under the archway of the door. Bond's gaze shifts from Mallory to a pair of fire extinguishers. He shoots both of them, creating a smokescreen in an attempt to push Silva out of the way. Bond and Silva exchange several shots into the smoke and misses. Silva gets in the police car and takes off, while Tanner rushes M out another door to a waiting car. Bond is driving the car as they drive away from the location. Bond calls Q and asks him to make phony trail for Silva. That night, they transfer cars to avoid being readily tracked. Bond switches to his vintage Aston Martin DB5. Bond logic that any official vehicle used by M and MI6 would be too easily traceable.